Okay, so here we are, 1745, and this should be down a space actually, because it's now available. And more than that, the Prussians, well, we'll get to that in a moment, but anyway, event-wise, we had madness for the English, a ruler change for the Austrians. They had an excellent minister. Now they have a pretty decent ruler in its place. It's going to mean an election to the Holy Roman Empire. Can occur this turn. And if nobody does anything, Austria pulls an extra 10 points. Okay. If other people are opposed to this, if France has enough money to try to buy the election, well, maybe they can get their cash instead. Elsewhere, let's see. We get a few events. A bunch of agricultural stuff, agricultural techniques for Turkey and Russia, refugees for France and the Habsburgs, for whatever that's worth. Spain got an agricultural crisis. The big bonus there, other than a little bit of money, is France's refugees, which is going to allow them, to grow their trading posts, etc., a little faster than they could otherwise. You'll notice they have Lally down here now, which kind of help them push into India. They want to make it into Delhi and be able to gain the value from there. Anyway, and the English have a new one too in Hastings. Both Asian only. But the big event, we had a destabilization and we had a revolt over here in Scotland, which is an English-controlled revolt, so they can declare war. They have a casus belli against Scotland. They may want to make that. They're expected to own Scotland. So by taking Scottish provinces, they get an advantage in terms of, well, less of a penalty in their victory point base. The only problem with that, of course, is France owns Scotland, and they may be pushing a war into happening that way. But the 7 Years' War erupted, and I had some words about it before. But now it's actually in play, and it's one of these fairly complicated events. It's got a lot of different little pieces to it. First of all, it only happens if Frederick's in play, or Prussia had taken something from Austria already. Or both, as historical. Prussia will declare war on Saxony, and we got to figure out who gets Saxony. I'm not sure who that's going to be. That's all determined in here. France gets first pick. They can't have them because they have Prussia. So it's going to go to England. Okay. At the very least, that positions England into kind of desiring to be on the other side. Now, England could refuse this, but they could end up stuck with it anyway if they do so. And there's people like Turkey or Russia who can refuse it with no penalty, essentially. So England would lose 2 stability and 10 victory points if no one takes it. And here's the problem. Someone like Austria or, Austria isn't tied up in a war right now, so they might actually take it and try to fight Prussia. Prussia without external support might have a hard try, but that might open a war with France. Austria really is thinking about the Turks at this point and diverting themselves over to Prussia. There's just not many turns left. This is the end of the period. Austria has to gain some Turkish territory according to their victory points. So they're not really too thrilled with going into France, especially with Turkey kind of on the ropes. Venice in a war right now, they're pretty interested in joining into that. Anyway, Russia has an interest in this war too. Now, they get a casus belli, I think, on the second turn. But if they manage to lose their monarch while Russia's fighting the war, and their monarch will be dying on turn 54. It's 52 right now, so that's pretty likely. They can make an informal peace, a white peace with Prussia, and gain 10 victory points for that. Wow, that's kind of a cheap set of victory points, especially since Prussia might not be able to do much. But that's only if the war still exists, right? Because Prussia could take Saxony out right away if nobody intervenes in the first turn. So, speaking of the first turn, Austria has a free casus belli to join into this. And this would automatically, I believe, give Saxony over to the Austrians. But they're not that interested in Prussia. They actually own the thing that they historically wanted back. France has a temporary casus belli, but if they use it, England gets a casus belli against them. If Saxony ends up at war against Prussia, if their controller ends up at war, they get a bonus against HRE miners for the duration of the event. And Prussia goes up to the war and lace technology. But here's the problem. It doesn't, this is the only event I've seen this for, it doesn't affect any of the technology markers. So they've just got sort of a notional position up here that isn't going to drag other people's tech up to them. That makes it very powerful, because if people hadn't, in this game people have been keeping their tech up, but if people hadn't been keeping their tech up, Prussia could actually keep their high technology for a long time the way this is worded. The original I don't think is worded like that, but maybe I'm wrong. And then there's all kind of, Prussia won't accept defeat. They don't have to. They have no constrained defeats. They don't have to roll for any kind of surrender, anything that's less than a positive or a white piece. So, as long as Frederick's still on the board. But if they take an unconditional surrender, they're forced into it. And if they're forced to accept an unconditional surrender, and Russia took Brandenburg, Russia gets some extra victory points and can annex all Prussian and Polish provinces bordering Russian provinces as one of the peace conditions made against Prussia. This annexation can be disputed by Russian allies per normal rules, and then Russia receives a free casus belli. So, Russia could get a lot bigger if they win this, right? There aren't any Prussian provinces that they can gain, but they would gain bonk, 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 dunk, dunk, which would help them tremendously. However, Prussia's involved in a war with Turkey. They didn't realize how much they have possibly to gain here, or Russia's involved with a war with Turkey. And also, Russia alone can't do this. Russia's not potent enough to destroy Prussia. It really needs to be a coalition of a lot of people. And I don't think that's going to happen. I don't see anybody desiring this war too much. All that really happens is France is going to get a bonus, probably on England, with an unconditional surrender of Saxony and gaining, some territory, etc. But this is really not going to be a big deal in this game. What might be the trigger for the big Franco-English war is if England goes into Scotland. Because Scotland is on the French track, which means that they immediately call for help from Scotland, or from France, and if France doesn't come in, that's going to drop them down, and then France has to fight with just the Scots. So, they might be interested in entering this war with an automatic Scottish ally. Then again, they might not be terribly interested in even that. Although, they have something else new, which is Vaudreuil, who, will help their North American conquests. So, there's a lot of balancing going on here. England will probably start the war on Scotland. I don't know whether France is going to play along, as it were. Anyway, that's what we've got. And I don't think I'm going to be jumping in and doing stuff right away, but over the weekend we'll get this done. By this done, I mean this turn. Maybe two. terms of the big diplomatic actions, the first thing is the French bought themselves the empire. That's 20 victory points and $75 back. They spent 250 though, so that's a lot. Oops, I forgot to do the little diplomacies. So I'll have to get to those and I'll come back in a moment. But the English decided not to take up an attack on Scotland. The feeling being they've got their hands kind of tied with these revolts right now. That's not going to get any better by opening up a new war, especially facing Vaudreuil there, who would cause problems for them. France also has this whole alignment of powers on their side. The English don't want to see that, especially not see Prussia going to war in here against Hanover, although there's a penalty because Prussia's already at war with Saxony. The French didn't choose to join that. They would have an easy time doing so as emperor. They could just march in, and in fact they could gain the advantage for it. But France doesn't want to get involved in wars. They're going to be a peaceful emperor if they can handle that. Elsewhere, Austria used the war with Venice as an excuse, and a casus belli, to declare war on Turkey. And they've got all these 7 Years' War leaders kicking around. Guys like Daun and Brown, who are very skilled leaders. To rank Frederick as high as they rank him, they have to make someone like Daun fairly useful against him. And even Brown. It's kind of an inflation because Frederick's seen as so great, but honestly, Frederick didn't win everywhere. So if they're going to rank Frederick anywhere near what they do, which is a 666, as good as you can get, well, they had better give those Austrian generals who kind of fought him to a standstill, although they had more troops and allies and everything, with some fairly decent ratings. All right, well, the French emperor doesn't have too long to live, but France, with the way they're cranking money, well, other people are going to have to time things well to prevent the French from getting the empire from now on, because they just can pretty much buy it. They can get the big +5 on every die roll. Now, they got really lucky on the dice. I think there were 4 electorates up for grabs. They had Prussia automatically. Saxony wasn't yet in English hands, although it will be. And they won every single one of them, which means they had to roll a 6 on every single one of them, basically. So that was a pretty hefty, there was some chance involved in there. But, well, they needed half of them. So that's... they did get away lucky. Anyway, it seemed worth the investment to take the shot, and now they've got it, and that puts them in a stronger position, although not terribly for the next one. They want to do some diplomacy, grab those electorates, things like the Palatinate and perhaps Saxony after the Prussians are done with them, so that they don't have to buy every electorate. All right, I'll come back after the diplomacy if anything interesting happens. Alright, so we're done with the economic stuff here in 1745. France's power is becoming more and more obvious. Just, I'm used to England being able to reach this level. No one else ever has, even when France has won the game or someone else has won the game. They didn't have this continuous... They're producing about twice what the English are on the board. Just what they destroyed of England's in that last war was so harsh and so fundamentally wrecked their economy that, and as well as capturing things, taking these valuable trading posts, that the English are making about half what the French are, and they're the next power. The other people can bring in about that amount of money. Now, once the English navy fleets are all up on the board, that's going to change. But because of the way I play the game, that doesn't change as quickly as it would otherwise. Anyway, beyond that, Turkey's economy is so bad that they don't have the ability to even launch a campaign. Basically, their choice was demobilize armies or try to defend themselves with interceptions. It's a bad choice either way. Perhaps had they demobilized this army, they could have had a few bucks to try to defend themselves against Austria and Venice, but yeah, they're not going to be able to even leave port or anything like that. They can leave port on an interception attempt, say if the Russians or Venetians come in and attack. Prussia has a truly massive army, filling all of Prussia, and here they've got every counter on the board. Remember, they can strike through Poland. The Austrians were able to build up a small army. It doesn't seem like much, but with Turkey unable to do anything, it really is. And meanwhile, Spain and England are still fighting the slave revolts here, and just not able to get a grip on that. Spain, I allowed them to sail their gold fleet last turn because it would have pretty much screwed them had they not. They got about half the money. They're set up with it again. Basically, they can't win this. They got lucky one turn. Anyway, I guess that's about it. We still got Algerians building a fleet, etc. The miners, remember, they don't get hurt. So Venice, Algeria, these guys are still fully committed. We've got Turkish leaders over here in the Crimea just to help bolster those forces. But I can't remove the Turkish admiral and put him over on the Algerian fleet because he's got a Turkish fleet he can command. Alright, we'll go to the rounds. Alright, after a brief bit of a break, I played Tim Jim's Age of Exploration with my wife today, which I guess was sort of enjoyable. We're seeing here the English and French both pushing deeper in towards Delhi, the French getting there, and they're going to be able to establish a trading post there, which is a wealthy area. It's one of the few areas left with more than a single product of the Orient, which is still the most valuable of the things, although slaves is kind of pushing it. If products of the Orient drops in price and slaves goes up to its maximum one more space, well, Spanish and English still working here. Over here, well, only the Algerians are able to move out of the Turkish forces. So they kind of tried to set themselves up and ended up doing some damage to this Russian fleet, which also got intercepted by the Turks eventually. And, well, it's not in great shape now. It's going to be tough for the Russians to finish their siege off at Azov. But here's the thing. The Turks have no money, and that's become kind of apparent by the fact that they didn't move at all. We have Austrians moving down into place. These are the Venetians here. The Venetians put their fleet out to help protect and allow the Russians to get through if they wish. And then Saxony just disappeared. The sieges are still there to go, but both Frederick and, who's not quite as good, Schwerin, wiped out but he wasn't facing much at all, wiped out the army. Prussia, actually, Frederick got a major victory. He wiped out an army plus that was worth more than 50 strength points all in one shot. Really just a firing round. That brings something interesting up, which is the chart for the War and Lace is the only one that gives cavalry a firepower, half the value of cavalry. It begins to set me thinking about the whole, gee, what is this fire and shock step? It seems almost intuitive. Yeah, I'm at a distance, I can shoot, and then we get close, and then we do the real fighting, and in that way it's kind of satisfying. But this is another thing that kind of falls apart when under examination, especially the giving cavalry a fire step in this period only. I think it may represent a tendency towards dragoons, maybe, or whatever. no matter what, it's probably representing the upward climb in terms of how valuable troops are facing one another. Although, it's kind of interesting because the older period has more of a chance of doing morale hits and could this is the more barbaric army then, right? The Scotsmen with their claymores coming down into the fight or whatever, they have more of a chance of breaking the more refined lines. The lines are going to decimate you, though, and we saw that here. That's the B table. Well, the big reason is you have Frederick, but the B table does a lot of damage. It's not quite the A table, but it's a significant jump in damage from the C table, but the C table does a little bit more morale hits. It's an interesting trade-off there. But anyway, going back to the Cav point, it almost doesn't make sense. Cav is valueless in the fire phase, which means, okay, all those pistols, the carousels, all that, that's been discounted. I don't mind that. I'm not sure how valuable that is, but then when I start thinking, wait a minute, most of these battles, maybe not at this point, but I think so, and certainly at earlier points, most of these battles had the Cav engaging first, the Cav versus Cav fighting, and opening the statement up on the wings, and then the centers slowly positioning themselves, and the firing, and eventually the shock combat taking place. That doesn't tell the intuitive, easy story, but on the other hand, it does kind of shake the whole edifice and let you say, well, you know, like so many other things, it just doesn't quite ring true. And you get kind of the feeling that, well, in so many ways, this game was just put together. Rigorous, you know, attempts to try to stick it all together. I'm sure there was a lot of thought put into it, but in the end, it just doesn't quite reach the level of simulation that you'd want for something that took this much work and effort to put together. And it takes this much work and effort, not just to play, but to work your way through the rules and everything. And perhaps the intuitive nature of fire and shock being divided the way they are, and Cav don't have guns and everything, is all more a little bit of design for effect in there, but also, hey, we want to make sure you understand these rules, so we're going to make the design seem intuitively clear in a way that we couldn't do if we tried to design it more, or quite simply maybe there wasn't that much thought put into it. It seems pretty good when you first think of it, doesn't it? Anyway, onward. It's one of those interesting turns militarily. We just finished up the set of rounds. It's as if nothing's happening, no big maneuvers or anything, just a lot of sieges. The Turks, unable to move, weren't able to defend themselves, so pretty much across the board they're just being sieged everywhere, and likewise the Spanish and English here. There were a couple little battles, but for the most part I'm just, you know, rolling lots of dice, and it took a decent amount of effort and time, but there was nothing interesting to talk about. Anyway, at the end of it, Prussia ended up taking Saxony out, and they now have Anhalt. The other Saxon space is still theirs. Prussia can't destroy a country the way Turkey or Russia can. So Saxony still exists as a minor. The Spanish took Sicily, Palermo, the western half of Sicily, back, and they're sieging Messina right now. You can see the Austrians have pushed down through Serbia. They've got sieges going on. Venice took Macedonia, and you know, they've got 3 territories under siege. I don't know how likely that is to convert into anything important. The Russians on their side took 2 provinces. They've got Kerch they're going to have to pull out of. The point here, though, is everybody kind of wants to get out of this war. Now the question becomes, well, what do we get out of it? Because Turkey obviously can't defend themselves. And I don't think they're going to be able to bring Spain and Russia down far enough to make it worthwhile. So then, well, and certainly not the Austrians. Then the question becomes, who gets what? And, you know, there's 3 provinces on the Spanish-Russian alliance. Maybe the Russians can get their provinces off the Crimea through a separate peace, although that's unlikely to get 2 whole provinces that way. And then likewise, The Austrians, well, they're in a position to really demand more, but there's not much for them to take. There's only 2 provinces. They'd kind of like to... I've looked at the rules, and I think they can take the one that Venice took directly. Oh, there's the 3rd province. So yeah, they could make their entire march down to the Black Sea, or not the Black Sea, the Mediterranean. Oh, I hope that's not a Black Sea port they're supposed to want. They want something. No, Mediterranean port. Okay, so yeah, so they'd really love to take Macedonia. Now that'll set them up for a war with Turkey. I'll come back after I finish up the turn and see what else ends up happening. Okay, so we push into the 1650 turn. What happened? Well, Turkey was in a constrained peace. They had no money, so they couldn't get their stability out of that -3 zone. And essentially, they count, the way I read the rules, or at least interpret them, they count as being in the -3 twice. So they had to give a peace to everyone. The Russians managed to get a separate peace with Crimea. Lucky roll here. They got like a 9. Maybe a 10, I don't remember. They got their 2 provinces that they were going to get off Turkey anyway. But that puts them in a better bargaining position with the Turks. So what ends up happening is Sicily goes to the Spaniards, and the Turks end up owning $150 to each of Russia and Spain. On top of that, Austria takes 3 provinces off of them, cutting their European provinces in half. Turkey's really becoming, something of the sick man of Europe at this point. The one thing that I'm looking at, well, point-wise, it's just ugly. French are over 1,000. We're seeing Venice close to England with the damage that's been done to England. And everyone's kind of willing to help the English cut their throats again with another war with France. England doesn't really want to do that. They've got a leader, Wolfe, now, and also Abercrombie, so they can start fixing their Caribbean revolts. But everyone else is kind of like, hey, come on, you want a shot at it? You want a shot at it? Let's take him. There's not a lot of time left. This is, next turn is the end of the period. And, well, it's not like there's anything terrible to take from the French by the end of the period. It's just there is sort of a, hey, maybe we should try to get this done by the end of the period. The fact that it's not going to be means that this is probably not going to be a war this period. All right, I'm going to cut this.